So the channel has gone global. It's reached right into the heart of the Australian Senate. And we've had a call out from an actual Australian senator, Senator Jared Rennick. Now, I did make a video on him a couple of days ago, so I suppose I issued the first call out. But he has responded, and he's responded on this channel with a challenge. And I'm going to give him the answer to my challenge in a second. But first of all, a little bit of backdrop. You can either check out the link in the description and watch the first video I made, or you can hang around for 60 seconds and just get a flavour of what was said. Now, Senator Jared Rennick is a climate change enthusiast. He's interested in the science around it, and it appears he is. And he seems to think that he spotted a flaw. He's not a scientist by trade himself, of course, but he spotted a flaw with the way expert scientists describe how climate change and the greenhouse effect in particular occurs. Now, one of those flaws that he thinks he's spotted is that a greenhouse is a solid, and the atmosphere and carbon dioxide are not solids. So therefore, how can the greenhouse effect be real if the greenhouse is a solid? You may think I'm doing him disjustice with that, so let me play that to you in his words.
The gases trap convection, because I find it confusing that we use this greenhouse gas term when a greenhouse is a solid glass object. And I was taught in grade 8 science that basically materials come in three forms: liquid, gas and solid objects, and I didn't know that gases could trap convection in the same way that a greenhouse would trap rising air, cool and then condense. I don't see how gases can do that.
No, and if you're going to reference your experience as being grade 8 science, I'm not surprised you don't understand the complexities of the greenhouse effect. If you're going to be using those terms, that's absolutely fine. I'm also interested that you think that the gases come down and condense. I've never stepped into my greenhouse and walked all over liquid nitrogen on the floor. There's obviously some misunderstanding. The way that scientists describe the greenhouse effect isn't how you think we are describing it. And he also seems to have a little bit of a problem when it comes to conduction. He seems to think that we are claiming that the atmosphere is being heated by conduction somehow.
So, first law of thermodynamics, or the equivalent of third law of Newton's law of motion: for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So assuming carbon dioxide, and it's not, but assuming it's the same weight as N2O2, how can one atom of CO2 heat up 10,000 other atoms of N2O2 through conduction?
Okay, so he's mentioning conduction, and first of all, nobody says it's conduction that is heating the atmosphere. Nobody says that the greenhouse gases are acting like a solid greenhouse would. These are obviously silly arguments, against a straw man. Now, I'll show you his reply in a second, actually, and we'll go through it. But what I first want to throw to you is this. If I met you in the street and you said, "Hey, Catz, what should we talk about?" And I said, "Look, I am the worldest, bestest expert on Star Wars. I know all about it. I'm such an expert I could sit in a Senate hearing and talk to other Star Wars experts and they would learn something from me." And you said, "Brilliant, tell me about Star Wars." And I said, "Well, my favourite Star Wars is Star Wars and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Captain Kirk drives that time-travelling DeLorean back to Hogwarts, where he runs over JFK." Now, when I said that, you'd probably get really bewildered. You'd understand some of the words I was saying, but you would have no idea why I am putting them in the order I'm putting them in, because it wouldn't make any sense. And I want you to hold on to that feeling of bewilderment. And then you might get close to how I felt when I read Senator Jared Rennick's reply to my video. Now, I have made a video that is now already uploaded for my channel members, where I've gone through this line by line pretty much. It's a half-hour long video, probably a bit dry, to be honest, but I go through it line by line. I don't shout memberships out much. Probably the first time I've ever done it. It's £1.99 a month. If you want to see that longer version, then you can pay £1.99. You can watch it, and then you can cancel at the end of the month. Not that I'm asking you to pay to watch videos, but there is a membership there. But I'm gonna in this video, I'm just gonna go through some of the key points, some of the worst things he's got wrong, just to highlight the fact that this kind of spaghetti word salad language that he's coming out with, that he actually accused the climate expert he was speaking to of coming out with, You know, it's really quite obvious to the rest of us where he's coming from. As far as Senator Gerard is concerned, if you want to come on the channel and debate any of this with me, you are more than welcome. Leave a comment, but no links. Links are blocked. Leave a comment and I'll get in touch with you. And you'll find me perfectly civil and everything will be hunky-dory. We'll have a great chat, I'm sure. But let's fly through some of the key things. Let's start here. You haven't actually rebutted my claim. Carbon dioxide is a gas. Gases are poor conductors of heat. The idea that an extra 100 parts per million of carbon dioxide can heat up by the surrounding million molecules by a degree defies the first law of thermodynamics. Bit of proofreading needed going on there. You can, that it is ridiculous, and I agree. The claim is absurd, yet what the climate alarmists argue. Gases are poor conductors of heat, so you are right, it's not about conduction. Woo! Where do I start with that? Well, the first thing is, no climate scientist says conduction is the reason for the greenhouse effect. No science teacher says it's conduction. No science textbook says it's conduction. No science educational videos says it's conduction. Nobody in the history of mankind seems to be saying it's conduction. As far as I can tell, it's only you saying that we are saying it's conduction. And what that's doing is that's making all of us scratch our heads and say, why is Senator Gerard Rennick bringing up conduction? And we are getting really confused. So my advice to you is stop talking about conduction and things will get a lot better. Just stop talking about it. Nobody's saying it. You're the one bringing it up. Nada. Stop talking about conduction. Let's just move on from conduction. Nobody's saying it's conduction. Hopefully I've made that point. Now, in order to just highlight a couple of other things he's got wrong here before leaving you to it, I just want to very quickly talk about how I teach the greenhouse effect to students when I'm teaching them. And this is just one part of a very complex system, but it's a part that Gerard might benefit from hearing because it doesn't have anything to do with conduction. Here we go. Or glass greenhouses. If an object needs to stay at the same temperature or wants to stay at the same temperature, it has to emit radiation at the same rate at which it's absorbing energy by radiation. Yeah, the energy out has to equal the energy in. It's like a bank balance. If you are withdrawing money at the same rate money comes in, the balance stays the same. But as soon as you start withdrawing money at a lower rate than it goes into the bank, you start saving the energy, the money, your account goes up. Think about energy that way. If an object is emitting energy at a lower rate than what it's absorbing, then the energy possessed by that object, the energy of that system increases, and therefore the temperature is going to increase. Now, when we look at the sun, energy from the sun will strike the earth and will be absorbed by the earth. It will then be re-emitted by the earth into space. And the ideal situation is it's re-emitted back into space at the same rate it is absorbed, and then the temperature of the earth stays the same. But greenhouse gases have a different plan. You see, the energy that is emitted back into space is a longer wavelength than the energy that is absorbed by the earth. And this longer wavelength is a wavelength that carbon dioxide molecules, greenhouse gases, will absorb more readily. They will, as he points out in one of his comments later on, if I've got the graph, carbon dioxide will actually absorb these higher frequency, shorter wavelength photons, but at a much smaller, they've got a much smaller affinity for doing that. So really we can say overall the net effect is that they are absorbing the outgoing radiation at a much higher rate than the inward radiation. And what that does when they absorb it is they then re-emit it in all different directions, some up into space, some back down towards the earth, and that is absorbed by the earth. And as a result, the earth is now not only absorbing radiation from the sun, it's absorbing it from greenhouse gases that are firing it back down, and it is no longer emitting radiation at the same rate at which it's absorbing it. It's actually absorbing it at a greater rate, and so the energy of the system is going to increase. That's passed on to the atmosphere, the air above it, which can then, that energy is passed on to the air above it, which can then transfer it through the atmosphere by convection. Oof, that was a mouthful, wasn't it? Notice I didn't talk about radiation or anything like that there. So let's get back to Gerard's, some of his points. This is a doozy of a sentence. Again, if you want to know what I've got to hear about, what I've got to say about everything, check out the members video, but this is a doozy of a sentence. A photon is absorbed or emitted by an electron, which itself is 1800 times lighter than a photon. No, it isn't. It's 1800 times lighter than a proton. A electron has a mass of about 9.11 times 10 to the minus 31 kilograms. A photon we would really describe as being massless. A photon is unbelievably massless compared to an electron. Why you would say an electron is lighter than a photon, I've got no idea. But you saying it's lighter than a photon seems to justify what comes next, which is this. How anyone thinks this can heat up the surrounding 10,000 molecules is just wrong. I don't understand why you thinking a photon being heavier than an electron ties into a carbon dioxide molecule heating up a surrounding 1,000 molecules. I can put together sentences like that. How can Wednesdays beat the colour blue in a sprint race when the rain is imagining food? There we go. I've just done it. I've just done what you've done there. The next sentence. Einstein himself says radiation is so insignificant it drops out of his 1917 quantum theory of radiation paper. Einstein said radiation drops out. Now, I had to put this through my team of interpreters. They read it and they were like, stop taking the piss, man. So I then had to come back and I had to try and figure out what I thought you were saying. And what I thought you were saying is this. I thought you are saying that these carbon dioxide molecules are emitting radiation, and this radiation is being absorbed by these particles, causing an increase in their momentum, right? Providing an impulse to them, causing an increase in energy, and you think that is another mechanism by which we are saying that the greenhouse effect works. And it isn't, obviously. But for me to figure out that's what you meant, I actually had to go to Einstein's paper here. Jared, it's 15 pages long, man. I had to read this. It took me an hour and a half to find the bit that I thought you were referring to. And when I found the bit, it seems to be this bit here. And what it says here is, in general, one restricts oneself to a discussion on the exchange of energy, and we're talking here when a photon is passed from one particle to another, without taking momentum exchange into account. This is what I think you mean when you say radiation drops out. One feels easily justified because the smallness of the impulses transmitted by the radiation field implies that these could almost always be neglected when compared to other effects causing these changes in motion. Now, what he's saying there, in fact, let me just go back. What he's, I think where you're going with this is with the greenhouse effect. These particles are banging into each other true all the time, and that's causing momentum changes, which are far, 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 far greater than any change that would be impacted by a single photon hitting one of these particles. But so what? Because nobody's saying that global warming or the greenhouse effect is a result of just these photons being re-emitted by carbon dioxide particles smashing into nitrogen and oxygen and causing them to gain momentum. That's not really how we're saying things go. Again, it's your straw man argument. You also overlook that carbon dioxide absorbs incoming shorter wavelength radiation. I've done that with the graph. It does. But it does absorb the shorter wavelength incoming radiation, but not anywhere near as much as it does the higher radiation. Let's look at some other absolute doozies. This one. Extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will increase the temperature as mass is energy, but not as much as the alarmists claim. Mass is energy. I'm assuming you're taking this from E equals mc squared, and you're just assuming if we have more gas in the atmosphere, then we've got more energy, and therefore that will mean that the temperature of the atmosphere will increase just because of the presence of that. No, because that energy that is distributed now among a bigger mass. If we take the ocean, which has billions of particles, doesn't it? Loads and loads of particles. It could be about 1 or 2 degrees C. And the average kinetic energy of those particles, which is what temperature is a measure of, will be quite low. But I could take a thimble of water and I could heat it so it's really, really hot. And the average kinetic energy of those particles will be really, really high because the temperature is hot. But the total energy of all those particles in that water, if I add it up, won't be a drop on the temperature of the ocean, purely because there's more mass in the ocean, there's more particles in the ocean. So a greater mass isn't going to cause, just by the nature of being a greater mass, a greater temperature. We have to have a higher average temperature a higher average kinetic energy per particle, which is going to lead to a higher temperature. So that makes no sense whatsoever. But then you've gone on to make it make even less sense by saying it, and I'm assuming you mean the temperature, will only rise in accordance with the increase in mass, which it doesn't, we've just covered that, added to the atmosphere as per the ideal gas law. As per the ideal gas law. Let's have a look at the ideal gas law. An ideal gas obeys this equation here, PV equals nRT. There are no ideal gases, right? The ideal gases are like a theoretical gas that will obey all of these things. For example, all the collisions will be elastic and all motion is frictionless, etc. And if we have a gas like that, it will perfectly obey this equation here. Now, a lot of gases do come very, very close to that equation, which is fine. But nowhere in this equation does it link to what you're saying here, that the temperature will only arise in accordance with an increase of mass added to the atmosphere as per the ideal gas law. That doesn't make any sense. In fact, for the same volume and pressure, if I actually increase the number of particles, I'll get a decrease in temperature for the same volume and pressure. I'll actually get a decrease. Doesn't make any sense. It's like taking a horse and chopping its head off, taking a Mr. Potato Man and gluing it to the Mr. Potato Man and saying, those two things go together really well, don't they? No, they don't. They don't. Nobody knows what you're trying to say with that. Anyway, I like this bit as well. Carbon dioxide isn't an ideal gas, but given it's only 1 part in 2,500, it's close enough. No, an ideal gas isn't not an ideal gas because of the number of parts per million. An ideal gas will be an ideal gas because it fits the criteria I showed you before. And all gases are pretty close to that in normal, moderate conditions. Doesn't make... You're using terms here that make no sense. I mean, how do I make sure my left shoe imagines the colour pink, when the rain doesn't exist? You may as well be saying stuff like that. Here comes the challenge. You need to show how the energy of a photon can heat up nitrogen and oxygen as they don't absorb photons. Now, what he's kind of saying here, again, is this straw man argument that if these are all oxygen and nitrogen molecules, that this carbon dioxide that's re-emitting these photons are being absorbed by these nitrogen and oxygen, and somehow that's raising the temperature. Well, that's your straw man argument. Let me show you something from a children's textbook. Do all gas molecules absorb and re-emit infrared energy, which is the wavelengths that we're talking about with carbon dioxide emission? And basically says no. It says here, nitrogen and oxygen, which make up more than 90% of the Earth's atmosphere, do not absorb infrared photons. You see, none of us here are saying that these nitrogen and oxygen are absorbing infrared photons. You are taking a complete straw man explanation of what you think the greenhouse effect is. You are recognizing that it's incorrect because it's your own straw man argument. And then you're saying, see, it's wrong. And everybody else around you is scratching their heads thinking, why is Senator Jared Rennick saying that we think nitrogen and oxygen are absorbing infrared photons and that's how the greenhouse effect works? None of us are saying that. Just you. Just stop saying it and it'll go away. Just stop saying it. The only way they can be heated is through conduction. Well, I don't know why you're saying that's the only way now. Well, before we said it definitely wasn't conduction. I mean, only up here. Only up here. You are right. It's not about conduction. Down here. The only way they can be heated is through conduction. From the higher motion of the carbon dioxide molecule. No, nobody's saying that. I gave you an explanation before about how the emission of carbon dioxide, the emission of energy from the carbon dioxide heats the Earth's surface, and this passed on to the atmosphere through convection. There's only you talking about a single carbon dioxide molecule somehow conducting the heat to the other molecules in the atmosphere. It makes no sense at all. So I will ask again. This is his challenge. Oh no, his challenge here was you need to show. Well, I'm just showing you that what you're saying makes no sense. You need to show me how a unicorn painting dreams can ride on a wish to the colour yellow. Yeah, that I'm using words too in a particular order, but as a package, not making any sense, isn't it? Anyway, he then goes on to say, basically, I've got to prove to him using an equation that demonstrates that the energy from one carbon dioxide molecule can heat up 10,000 molecules around it. For that, I'm going to give you an analogy, and it's the best I can do at this point, the best I can be bothered doing, unless you want to come and have a debate with me about it. How can one carbon dioxide particle have a significant effect on lots of others? Well, this is an analogy. Don't take it literally. I'm not saying a carbon dioxide molecule is an actual bucket. I'm not saying the greenhouse effect means carbon dioxide is an actual greenhouse. Okay, this isn't an actual bucket, but it's a carbon dioxide molecule. It's an analogy. We're pretending. Here I've got a bath, which is going to be the rest of the atmosphere. Please don't think it's an actual bath. It's an analogy. I'm not saying that the atmosphere is a bath. And I want to fill up this huge bath with this tiny bucket. And you might say, Catz, hang on. How can one tiny bucket have such an effect that it fills up an entire bath? That is crazy. So then I might say, well, hang on. What if I have a constant stream of water in the bucket? Maybe like a constant stream of solar energy coming to the earth. And what if my bucket had a leak? Maybe, just like the carbon dioxide molecules that are constantly re-emitting the energy they absorb, maybe my bucket could constantly re-emit the water it's taken on board. Do you like the analogy? It's pretty good. Now, if I hang that over the bath, we can suddenly see that this bucket is having a huge effect on the bath, but it's not really about the bucket. It's about the constant incoming source of water and the fact that it's building up in the bath. Just like it's not really about the carbon dioxide molecule, it's about the constant incoming source of energy that the carbon dioxide molecule is then firing back towards the earth. That's a nice little analogy, isn't it? I like that. So, Senator, you are more than welcome on the channel. You do say here, smearing me by name calling isn't actually answering the question. I've not called you a single name. I've not called you a single name, and I won't if you come on the debate. For those who want a more detailed thing, say that video is up there for the members, but it's not worth it. It's not worth the £1.99 just to watch that, I'll be honest. That's it. That's my response. Bye-bye.